Hello, does that work? Excellent. Well, thank you for having us here, and I think it's going to be a really exciting conference. John, do you want to come and be in shot for a second?
Shall I?
Yeah.
I should.
Yeah.
Okay.
Spot the underground.
So John, as you can see, is fully declared as being part of the Myers-Briggs company. I used to be part of that when it was OPP, but haven't been for the last couple of years. But that, full disclosure, that's our heritage. That's how we know each other. That's really where we both learned about type, although each of us had some introduction to it a little before that. What we're going to talk about today is really off the back of a paper we had published last year in the Journal of Personality Assessment. So that came about. Oh, you don't have to use the
No, I can use it.
thing.
You'll see why in a minute.
Okay.
You might notice we haven't actually rehearsed this, so we'll see how it goes.
And one of us is a bit more scatty than the other. You can kind of work out which one's which. Anyway, last year we managed to publish this paper in the Journal of Personality Assessment. That came about because I was invited to contribute something to a special issue that was about the use of personality assessments in consulting, and they wanted to have something about type in there. So when that invitation came through, I was mulling around, well, do I want to do this, and what would I write about? And realised eventually that it was going to become a great vehicle for me to talk about things that I have been talking about for many years, but hadn't really had much of a formal, certainly not in a peer-reviewed article kind of explanation. So John and I buddied up and created this paper, which is peer-reviewed, did get published, went through all that critiquing thing that the peer review academic process does, but it is in a lovely, respectable, highly regarded journal. It is not the greatest read, I have to say. I think it reads like an academic article. If that's what you enjoy reading, good for you. But
it is only 12 pages.
Hmm?
It is only 12 pages.
It is only 12 pages of really quite small font. But it is there, so I think it's a lovely reference for that. It's probably not the thing that every one of you is going to want to read, and probably not the kind of thing that all your clients might want to read. But it is there to be kind of that foundation that says it has got through all those hoops and hurdles, and it is properly rigorous in there. Unfortunately, or no, it's not unfortunate, it just is a fact that you can download a copy of this from the journal's website, but they charge a fee for that. So we haven't been able to just kind of distribute it around. That is their business model. They go to the trouble of publishing something. They own the IP. But we can help you out a bit if you get in touch with us and really want a copy of it at some other point. And in any case, what we're going to do today is to extract from you the juicy goodness of what was in there and package it up in hopefully a nice, palatable, potentially fun and engaging way to start off this conference. This is where you've got the thing.
So I've got the thing.
Yeah.
So do you want to go? Tell me when you're ready to go.
So you may be aware that we sometimes get some mixed coverage in the press. Sometimes it's really positive, and sometimes it just makes the hairs on the back of my neck rise. So last year, this was on Start the Week, so well-respected Radio 4, normally pretty well-researched. I have to say it's the first time I've bothered writing to Radio 4 to kind of give them a piece of my mind. But this is how it went.
The Myers-Briggs, I should say, never enters any of the modern science.
No, of course not.
And,
well, we were going to get onto that.
Yeah. But about the innate category thing, I do wonder. Robert Hogan, who's kind of one of the main personality researchers, says that in a review that the Myers-Briggs indicator is essentially like an elaborate fortune cookie.
Well, right, and so this
it's
is
an astrology for the mind, isn't it?
Well, it's different in a way, but this is sort of the premise of my book, right, is I take for granted that it's neither scientifically valid nor reliable. And so then, for me, the interesting question becomes, why is it that it exercises such a hold on our cultural imagination? Why is it that people do, casually refer to themselves as introverts or extroverts?
So, thank you for fixing the sound quality on that. But you got some of the nice sound bites. The Myers-Briggs, he kept saying he couldn't even get the name right. Never enters any of the modern science. It's essentially an elaborate fortune cookie. You've got to trust Bob Hogan when he says that, selling his competitor's personality instrument. It's astrology for the mind. I take it for granted that it is neither scientifically valid nor reliable. She takes it for granted. Not a true statement, but she takes it for granted. And why is it that it exercises such a hold on our cultural imagination? So there has been a lot of this lately. The most recent has been largely linked to this final speaker in that Merve Emre who wrote a book. It was actually a biography of Catherine and Isabel. I think she started out with a good intention to do a biography and was interested in their story, and actually quite a feminist angle, but it was, to her surprise, it was written by two women. But as she entered the press release in popular media, the thing she has been drawn on time and time again is this statement about it. It's not scientifically valid or reliable. She's an English professor, obviously would know all about that stuff. So this is what we are hearing all the time, and sadly, it's what our clients are hearing. And even though the clients might have had an attraction to working with type, when they hear this kind of thing, they go, oh, maybe I'm not so sure. And that's a real problem, because before you get your foot in the door to actually do some good work with them, they've got a whole lot of extra negativity sort of sitting around the back of their mind. So we're going to talk a bit about how we manage that. I think all of you probably have your own way of managing that. We are talking specifically about the Myers-Briggs when we talk about this, but actually many of the criticisms that are thrown at the Myers-Briggs could equally be said about all of type, so hopefully it's relevant for whatever tool you happen to use and your approach to typing people. So your turn.
I think it's my turn.
Excellent.
God, isn't it good when the power comes together? So, there's going to be a lot of information in the presentation, and it is just after lunch. So we're going to go for a little bit of interactivity. We're going to start off easy by just getting you to raise your hand. So, what I'm going to do in a moment is ask you what you mostly use the personality questionnaires for. Not just the MBTI or any other type instrument, any personality instrument that you have to use. I'm going to show you a range of different applications, stuff that people do with personality questionnaires. I'm just getting you to raise your hand if you use this application. Everybody ready? Are you ready?
Yes!
Good! Got it out of my system. Right, first one. Leadership development. Okay, quite a lot of you. Good. Next one. This is why I got my glasses on. I can't remember what I said. Team building. Slightly more. Career counselling. Yeah, quite a few of you. Coaching. Yeah. Interesting to see the different hands go up in different ways, but I'm not taking note of that, honest. Conflict resolution. Quite a few of you again. Recruitment and selection.
Not MBTI.
Not any personality questionnaire. Any personality questionnaire. Few of you. Okay. Yeah, no, not the MBTI, but if any of you said that, anyway, we all go there.
We know that.
Training, like sales training or communication training. Quite a few of you. And, anything else? Let's have a few shout-outs of the else's things. I'm interested. What else do you do with it?
Everything else.
Anything else? We live our lives by personality questionnaires. Anything else?
Yeah, personal reflection.
Yeah, reflection, yeah.
Yeah, self-development.
Self-development, yeah.
Education.
Education.
Relationship enrichment.
Relationship enrichment, okay. Now, what strikes me about the way you answer those questions is that when we're talking about something else or all other things, there's a lot more hands going up for stuff about development than stuff about selection and recruitment. And, perhaps that's not unreasonable because, after all, you're an audience of type practitioners, so you're probably more invested in the development space than other people. So let's go and look at some other data and see if that's the case elsewhere as well. Now, some of you will have heard of those wonderful folks called the British Psychological Society, the BPS. Some of you looking slightly pained as I say that. Some of you looking slightly blank as I say that. But the BPS, to some extent, regulate the use of testing questionnaires in the United Kingdom. And we have this thing called the Register of Qualifications and Test Use, and people go through training against their competencies, so they can do the MBTI training as well, to say if they are a competent user of tests or questionnaires. Now the thing about this training is that it covers all aspects of using tests and questionnaires, but if anything, it's a bit more orientated towards selection applications, that is to development applications. So you might expect that people who are on that register to be more invested in selection than development. Does that make sense? Yeah? A couple of years ago, the BPS carried out a survey. They found 280 people who are on this register. So sounds like 280 people on the register. Found 280 people who are on this register and surveyed them about their use of tests. And these are the applications which more than 20% of the group said they used them for. Now, if you look at all those applications, these are people who aren't necessarily type people. These are people who have been trained using the BPS criteria, which are more aligned towards selection than anything else. The big hitters there are actually about development, as also the other ones a little bit further down. So even on this group of people, it looks as if they're using personality instruments more for development than they are for selection, even though the BPS training has a bit of a slant towards selection. So it looks as if, although based on evidence, people are using questionnaires more for development. This is some data from a survey which is 10 years old now, which asks people about which tests, sorry for the word test, but that was in the survey, which test the organisation used. You see the MBTI comes out top when it comes down to personality questionnaires. There was data in the recent BPS survey where they also asked the same question. They haven't published it, but I saw it in the presentation and the MBTI still came out top, as did other development tools. So it looks as if people are using questionnaires designed for development, things like the MBTI, more than questionnaires which are more about selection, like the 6CPF, or the Hogan, or the Big Five, or the OPQ. So people do use the MBTI. It does exercise a hold on our cultural imagination in that sense. But as we know, it's been very widely criticised. And some of that criticism may come, as we see a bit later, from applying the sort of criteria that are relevant for selection to the use of tests and questionnaires in development. And we'll look at that in more detail later. But before that, let me ask you another question. I'm going to answer it in a second myself, actually. Why do people still use the MBTI assessment despite all the criticisms? I think there's possibly two big answers there. Maybe, just perhaps, some or all of those criticisms aren't really valid. They don't really stick, they don't really apply. And maybe, independent of that first one, actually the MBTI approach, the type approach, is really useful when it comes to individual development of people or teams. So, why then do people criticise the MBTI? Now, this is your chance to talk to a friend, or possibly someone new. Get together on your tables with the persons next to you, and just have a quick, let me see, 3.5-minute discussion? 3-minute discussion on why you think people criticise the MBTI. Go. Now, sometimes I find that, not always, but just sometimes, on a bad day, when I'm at my best, criticism of the MBTI really get under my skin. And I want to shout out. So this is your chance to shout out. Why do people criticise the MBTI? Let's just have anybody shout out. I'm not going to do it formally. Somebody.
It doesn't capture the full potential of Jungian psychological type.
Really? That's not a common word, but thank you anyway. Anything else?
You can't put me in a box.
Politics.
It can't be reduced to physical reductionism.
Okay, you can't put me in a box, it can't be reduced down to physical reductionism. Angelina.
They don't actually know how to use it. They don't know how to use the information it gives.
Okay, so we don't know how to use the information it gives. It puts academic status at risk. Interesting one.
It's not quantitative, and people think it clashes with the norm curve approach of standards.
It should have numbers, it should have scores.
To follow on that, it uses nominal or categorical data.
Okay.
And that's too much like biology, which is a shitty science. Instead, it should be like physics.
Sometimes literally.
Yeah.
I hear it, folks. Yes, anybody else?
Financial interest in another model.
Financial interest in another model?
Just it follow the money. Why would Hogan have anything good to say about that?
Yeah, they don't understand the robustness and the validity.
They don't understand the robustness.
It's a quick fix, but there are too many people walking around with 4 letters having no idea what it means.
So bad previous practice, I guess.
Why not Big 5?
Why not Big 5? Because it's other stuff. One more.
It changes every time I've done it.
Change every time I've done it. Okay.
Cost.
So,
Cost.
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 Nothing I can personally do anything about, I'm afraid. So, there's a number of reasons. What we've got here is two things. You've actually combined 2 things in your answer, but that's fine. Because we're going to talk about why people criticise the MBTI, and then we'll give you another chance, just a short while, to come up with some of what those criticisms are. So what we have here are a number of people why people criticise the MBTI, and these are the sort of things that we put up on our slide. And one of the things I think is interesting to think about, and it's something that you didn't really talk about, is the idea that the MBTI is the tallest tree in the forest. It is a lightning rod. If people have heard of personality questionnaires, they have probably heard of the MBTI. So if you're somebody who doesn't like the idea of personality testing at all, the MBTI might well be your target. And it's interesting, and Pete was talking earlier about Merve, is that the right pronunciation? I'm not quite sure what
Merve Emery, I believe it's pronounced.
Okay.
It was on that radio show.
Okay. We should go with Major 4.
It's BBS, yeah.
So, one of the interesting things about Merve Emery's book is that, as Penny said, most of it isn't about dissing MBTI as the MBTI, but a lot of it is about the idea that perhaps personality assessment per se is not a good thing. Perhaps there are capitalist overtones to it. And that's an entirely different argument. But often people who want to criticise personality assessment at all will pick up the MBTI because it's the tallest tree in the forest. It's the one that people are concerned about. We heard this one, we have promoted an alternative book, so yeah, of course Bob Hogan would. I'm sure he's a lovely man, but he does have a competitive product. Some of you may remember a few years ago, Adam Grant was well known for criticising the MBTI. He was a disinterested academic who also had his own test, but hey, I'm sure he was an academic. There's a belief that more detailed or more numeric or trained measures are superior. And sometimes people are just jumping on the bandwagon. And this, I think, is something we saw in the Merve situation, whereby the journalists who interviewed her were jumping on that bandwagon of it, not being valid, not being reliable, and that was an easy sell. So people will jump on that bandwagon. So let's go on to talk about, I think this is back to you, Penny. So we've sort of talked about it already, but you may want to do some more.
I may have nothing to say. I was just going to add to one of those points, particularly to be fair to Bob Hogan. He did, around the time that Merve Emery's book came out and was getting a lot of publicity, he wrote a blog that was actually very supportive of type process and practice and talking about how useful it is in development. But when you've got a lot of time and you really want to get to the depths, you should obviously use his questionnaire. But he did actually write a blog that was very supportive. Not seen it quoted by anybody. So I think there's also that thing that people do have breadth of views, but when, particularly journalists, I think, I hope you don't have any journalists something rude to in the audience. I think when you're on a deadline and you're pushed, you go for whatever the top Google search view is, and that gets recirculated and amplified. And I think that we've seen a lot of that with the Merve Emery experience, but actually it was similar when Adam Grant did his stuff a few years ago, and similar when Annie Murphy-Hall did her stuff a few years earlier. I mean, it's the cycles we go through. So we did have a bit of a mix of the what do people say in critique, as well as the why might they critique. Were there any other criticisms of the MBTI, or indeed type practice generally, that didn't come up?
It was culturally specific.
Culturally specific. So that American thing? Is that what you mean?
No, it didn't include people from other continents. Not American. I mean, it was Western rather than...
It's Western rather than Eastern, although there has been work done to
But the questions are
yeah, although they have been adapted in Japan, for example.
Korea as well.
And China.
Britain is a very multicultural country.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an interesting thing. I find myself already kind of backfooting and wanting to explain that actually the norm sample that was done here in the UK was based on a random selected sample that included a full selection of all the different kinds of backgrounds and ethnicities and things here. But that may not be well known. And it's just perceived to be that it hasn't been very well put together in that way. Angeline?
Some people just say it's old, we want something new and different.
New,
So
shiny!
rather than it's old and established, yes, new and colourful perhaps.
Yeah. New, colourful, shiny. Yeah. Yeah.
It's too complicated. A lot of people just can't deal with 16 different. They want something simple. So 4 is an easy number. I can do 4, I can't do 16.
I can do red, green, blue, yellow.
I can do red,
Like
green, blue.
doing
Exactly.
four whole letters in my head.
In
is
Germany,
hard.
they can do 4, they can't
Yeah,
do 16.
absolutely.
It's too difficult.
Criticism I often hear about the questionnaire is that the either-or nature of the questions is too limiting. A lot of people say they'd like to see a like-it scale with, a lot like me, somewhat like me, neutral, and lot not like me, etc. So it's a sliding scale rather than an either-or.
So it's more comfortable to complete something on a sliding scale.
So do people say similarly? People say a dichotomous view doesn't reflect reality because it's all there's more people somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, so that dichotomous view thing comes up a lot. Yeah.
Not scientific improvement.
Yes, and again I find myself wanting to go, yes, but that is one of the very common critiques, and because it comes up top on the Google search, it gets repeated and repeated and repeated, and then the journalist looking at it says, I've got 10 independent people saying, of course I take for granted there's no scientific reliability or validity, as if those were independent. Yeah.
The basic dichotomies are questionably or vaguely defined.
Right, so it seems a bit woolly. I know you wouldn't use these terms, but for me that goes into the thing, it's a bit like horoscopes, it's all a bit kind of, anyone can be anything, and it's all positive. And
I've never compared my horoscope.
no, as I say, I know you wouldn't, but for me that's that bundle of critique that comes from that same place. So try to look at that.
I think it's easy for us to forget to offer it to people as a hypothesis.
Yeah.
So that they can resonate with their experience.
Yeah.
We make it too definite.
Yeah.
You know, it is a hypothesis.
Yeah.
How does this fit for you?
Yeah. So again, I would see that as a bit of the putting me in a box kind of stuff, and if it was offered as a hypothesis, you're not putting anybody anywhere, you're just offering them a framework for understanding.
And you're drawing on their experience. So it's a two-way.
Definitely. And I would add to that, because I think it probably applies more to people outside of this room than in this room, there is a lot of, shall I call it, iffy practice that goes on in the name of type. Sometimes by qualified type practitioners, but really often by people who've read a book and are kind of enthusiastic, have found a freebie thing on the web, and they do it, and it pops out that, you are an ISFJ, and you feel put in that box, and they think that that's what type is all about. So all of that iffy practice that goes on, sometimes well-intended, sometimes not necessarily.
I think there's also a misunderstanding of numbers.
Yeah.
Because most questionnaires come up with numbers in the results, and the numbers are not relevant to your type in the end.
Yeah. So sometimes that's sort of linked up with this thing of wanting to make it like a hard science. People want to grab onto the numbers and over-interpret them. I mean, something that they don't care. Yeah.
The objection that it's self-recording and objective.
Yeah. Yeah. Because who would know about your personality as well as you do? Clearly you need someone else to give an independent validation. And I think John mentioned the idea that sometimes people just don't like the idea of there being a personality assessment. We are all unique, and unless you get my uniqueness in the however many billion people there are in the world, you haven't got me. And that doesn't really fundamentally object to any of that going on.
I think there's a danger of the online questionnaires being so easily available that there's no context for it. So it's a bit like a home doctor book.
Yeah.
They look in there, see a symptom and say, I must have X, I must be X, and then, I think they need the context because it's a complex tool.
It is.
And we all know we spend ages dealing with it, thinking about it, working with it, just how complex it really is. So they get false reporting, there are misunderstandings, the nuances of individual words, as we talked about this morning.
Yeah.
They need somebody to help them navigate that, like a doctor would help a patient to navigate symptoms.
So it's that enthusiastic self-help, go to Google, grab a book, I think I know what it is.
And then the sort of sense of, no, that's not me.
And then ultimately, again, perhaps I didn't like that.
And please, everyone speak much louder.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's actually not a conversation with Penny, it's a conversation with the room. Because back here, we can't...
You're not catching it.
Okay.
Repeat it on the mic, maybe. It's emphasise.
So there's a request for me to repeat everything on the mic so everybody can hear it. Does that help?
So I did hear a new one recently. They said, oh, that's all based on the work of Freud, right? Well, I was young, and they're like, oh, those guys.
Right, so people might object to Freud or Jung or whoever they think it's based on. I would probably put that in that bundle that Angelina raised, it's that old thing, surely we've moved on, some version of that.
People have changed so much.
Because fundamentally personality's moved on, hasn't it? Okay, I think that's probably enough of that, but we all have a bit of a sense and we have our favourite things. We've tried to put them into a few clusters so as to respond to them, which we do in the paper and we will shortly. So just going to repeat because I like to pour salt in various wounds. So this is one that gets repeated a lot. So the MBTI is pretty much nonsense, sciencey snake oil. It is well established by research, no references. It has no more reliability and validity than a good tarot card reading. So that's the kind of thing that keeps being repeated. But he himself provides no references for the fact that there isn't any reliability and validity.
It's not even getting reliability of a good tarot card reading.
So this is Merve's book, which we've covered already slightly, and a few others. So
Sham question.
We get called a sham questionnaire, discredited as unscientific, irrelevant tosh. That was a particularly nice one to wake up to one morning. The MBTI is highly suspect, failing to measure what it purports to measure, has low reliability, in failing to elicit consistent responses across testing contexts, it has low reliability. That was in Nature. I expect better from Nature, and I wrote to them and told them. I've written 2 such letters in the last year. Brilliantly, my letter got published, to give them credit. But that still is sitting out there with the credibility of Nature having regurgitated it. Whoops. Why is it not going now? Okay. So another criticism that often comes up is that they were not psychometricians, they weren't qualified. You come across that one? I find it slightly misogynistic quite often when you think about the era that they were writing in and how many women would have been qualified in any form of psychology. If you also think about the era, how many psychometrics courses do you think there were about before there were any personality questionnaires? Probably not a lot. And in thinking about this, and for years we've sort of argued back about the fact that they get referred to as being a couple of housewives who did this on their kitchen table. It's one of the sort of very frequent things that comes out, and you kind of go, what's wrong with working on the kitchen table? Many big corporations had its roots in someone's garage or someone's kitchen. Why is that a problem? And it sort of gets labelled. So as I say, I think there's sort of slight misogynistic thing around there. My favourite counter that I came across a few years ago, though, was about the Wright Brothers. So you've all heard of William and Orville Wright, first powered flight. Did they have degrees in aerodynamics? No. Were there people also trying to do the same thing, who did have all of those degrees and qualifications and all the funding? Yes. Who succeeded? The Wright Brothers. So I just think that's interesting. And if I'm getting on my feminist high horse, really interesting that the women who did something really interesting still are being criticised for being a couple of housewives. The men who had a bicycle shop that taught us all how to fly are hallowed and lauded. Just an interesting observation. It could be completely off base, but it's an interesting thing. Oops. I don't need to get these moving. So there's my Wright Brothers piece. So, no formal training, but yet they succeeded. So you don't need to have formal training to succeed. It can help us sometimes, but actually if you're the pioneer of something, and they were pioneers, you're not going to have the formal training. You're going to be inventing it and innovating and being entrepreneurial as you go. John, I think this is you.
I think it was me.
Mostly also notice they're not quite on the screen with the things.
Yes, the slides onto the books because it's sitting out the end of the screen. So, we've measured this one, it puts you in a box, it confines you, people just come in 16 flavours, it oversimplifies things. And of course, this is ignoring the idea that your type shouldn't be something that is not meant to be something that confines you. It's meant to be the springboard where you can jump to other places. And many of you are probably familiar with this idea of the type house. You familiar with this metaphor? So the idea is that here I am here, in this room of the house with my preferences for INTP. And that's definitely a deep part of who I am. In many ways I behave like somebody you might expect to behave with those underlying type preferences. But it doesn't mean I can't visit other rooms and do other things when I need to. And one of the part of the whole ethos of type is it's not confining. It is about knowing where you're coming from so you can decide where to go to. And that's something which people often miss. We may make it worse sometimes by putting things in tables, but it's the place we go to. It's not something that just says exactly who we are. You probably heard the saying, and adapted it to your own type, every INTP is like every other INTP, and is like no other people. Yeah? We all have our uniqueness, but that evidence and idea about type gives us an anchor, gives us a place to come from. And I think you have a...
I do.
So that was a short one.
Very short one, wasn't it?
It was a very short one. I think you probably didn't stop when we mentioned it before, but that's okay.
Yes.
I could flex.
So something else you may have come across before was a numbers exercise. It was published at OPP when it was OPT a few years back. If people have done this before, please just bear with the exercise while we do it again for those who haven't. I'm shortly going to show you an array of numbers. You may need to get a bit closer to the screen to see them. They are the numbers from 1 to 54. What I want you to do is to be able to find with your eyes and think in your head, no talking, each of the numbers in order. Okay, so they're all up there, they're going to be jumbled, you're going to be looking for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when you get to the end, I want you to make that known to us. Put your hand up, go yippee, bingo, whatever you like. Okay?
Yellow's very
The figure prize for you later.
So how many people got to 30? Yeah, a few? 20? A few more? 10? Okay.
The yellow ones might have been missing. Yeah.
I was impressed that people up the back were even trying it from there, but that may be more a statement of my eyesight than anything else. I know I couldn't do it from back there. How did that feel for people? Frustrating, challenging, tedious, pointless. I'm hoping I'll give you a point in a moment. I'd like to use this one when I'm kicking off type work. But anyone else in the room who's done this before? I know Catherine has done it with you. Anybody else familiar with this? Yeah, okay. So a few of you will have seen it before. I like to kick off with it, partly because it's always good to do something at the beginning. And you get a bit of an observation, you find out who can't resist talking even though they've been told to do it in silence. You find out that people who are more frustrated when I say stop and they haven't finished, and people like to finish. You find out the people in the room who think they know about this stuff already and go, this is a really sensing exercise, I don't do sensing, I really hate that stuff, I don't need to do that. So you do pick up type relevant stuff. But my reason for showing it to you today, and it's also a reason for showing it to people when I'm working with them who are new to type, is that there is actually a method to all of that. if you understand the framework. So they weren't exactly like that, but they did all sit within this framework. No one's been put in any box. The numbers were not rearranged and placed in boxes. They just were what they were. But there was a framework to knowing where we might find them most easily. So if you come back and look at the exercise again, you might find, you can now find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so you may have been hampered by some of the colour changes. But the point is that they are all there, they haven't been moved around and put in boxes. They were always in the boxes they were in, they happened to be in a certain framework. And I like to think of this as a bit of an analogy for people, that if you had long enough for that silly thing with the numbers, you would find them all. You would get there in the end, you would figure it all out. And when you know people for long enough, you kind of get a sense of who they are and who's like you and not like you and where you're going to wind each other up and where you're going to get along. But if you have a framework, you can get there a whole lot faster. So it's not that anyone's been put anywhere, it's just we're putting this framework over the wondrous nature of human individuality, and that gives us some shortcuts and some helps to get there more quickly than we might have got there. But we probably would have got there eventually if we put enough time and effort into getting to know each person that we need to get to know. And it's not that we're doing anything trying to change people, we're just trying to sort of get a sense of who we are in relation to other people. So I find that to be quite a useful analogy for getting across this concept with people, sometimes in conjunction with the typehouse. I think we all need to have a few of these things up our sleeves so that when we come across people who are uncomfortable for whatever reason, we have some different ways of getting it across too. Any comments, questions?
So it's really sort of like a heuristic support, as it were.
Yeah.
It allows you to quickly get a sense of who people are, and it builds on that using theory.
Yeah, exactly. So I've just used the word framework, but heuristic would work well. Theory is another one. It's finding the right word for the audience you're working with as to what will be most meaningful for them.
Is that available? That's available on the website.
That is available on the Myers-Briggs Company website. I don't know how best to tell you just how to find it. It may be. Is it a link in the back end of this? The links.
We have a link in there. I'm not sure we have a link. We have links on there, I think.
Oh, there you go. Well, that's the old website.
That will still work, actually. That will still work.
Good. And it was once in a blog written by me, but I don't know if you can search on that very easily.
Well, you have,
anyway, it's there. We'll probably find it if you can't find it. And it is there in a form that is intended for you to download and use and propagate and share, and whichever type theory you're working with, it works equally well for that. So we'll move on to another common criticism or bundle of criticisms. Would you like that?
I would like that, thank you. So this is a criticism that we mentioned already here, not frequently. It's like a horoscope. These descriptions could fit anybody, of course, people are going to agree with them, because they're all positive and all flattering. And it's an interesting criticism, but it'll be very easy to understand. But fortunately for us, it's just not true. So let's just talk through that there, because really I think there's two issues there. The first issue is that, in my experience at least, people don't just agree the type descriptions that don't fit them. If you read somebody in the type description for the type which is opposite who they are, they tend not to agree with that. Of course, our own personal experience doesn't necessarily matter so much when it comes to scientific research. If only somebody carried out some studies to demonstrate that this wasn't true. This is something which is known in psychology by psychologists as the Barnum effect. This is a guy called Phineas T. Barnum. Anybody ever seen the Greatest Showman, the film that was on? That's what he really looked like. It's not like Hugh Jackman. He doesn't even have a nice jacket. Called the Barnum effect, so apparently named after Barnum's phrase, something to everybody. So the idea that these phrases can apply to everybody. As I said, fortunately there's some evidence that actually these phrases don't apply to everybody, that people don't agree with phrases that don't fit them. So Hampton Cook, all the way back in 1982. Imagine that. In 1982, someone disproved the idea that everyone would agree to all those type descriptions being like that. Back in 1982, he showed people 4 type descriptions, asked them to rank order which was the one that most fitted them, and oddly enough, the distribution was, to use psychologist terms, non-random. The one which most fitted their type was the one that they picked first. More recently, Pick and Bryder, they rated type descriptions which matched their reported type as much more descriptively accurate than mismatched ones. And also in 2013, Schaubert, what she did was to give people type descriptions, and they rated the type description on average, they rated a type description which matched their reported type as fitting them better than any other type description, even one which was only out by one choice. So there's lots of evidence, well, a reasonable amount of evidence, that actually people are more likely to agree with the type description which fits them, and don't agree with other ones. So it's not that they're vague, and that everybody agrees with them. But the second thing in this system is about them being positive. And actually I think there is nothing necessarily wrong with being positive about people, especially when you're talking about individual development. If I went to you and said, let me give you some feedback, I would tell you all the things that are wrong with you first. Perhaps may not work quite so well. And indeed, there's academic evidence as well from academic studies. All of these studies are in our paper, by the way, which demonstrate that people are more likely to accept positive feedback, to act on positive feedback, even if it's then followed up by the more developmental, less positive things afterwards. So even in academic studies, there's good evidence that positive feedback works well. So it's not too vague. It is largely positive, although there are things there which may look at your development areas as well, but there's nothing wrong in itself with things being positive. And another question, I put the same quote that Penny put up earlier because it applies to this. It's snake oil. People familiar with the phrase snake oil, know where it comes from? Some of you read on? It comes from the way back in the 19th century, where you had travelling medicine shows, thank you, which used to travel around the American West. They had these snake oil salesmen who would sell you oil made from snakes, which would cure all ills. And that's where the phrase snake oil comes from. And I think there's a couple of issues in here again. One is that, frankly, if you're going to criticise the MBTI, this is such a lazy criticism. You haven't even got out of bed to do this one. It's just a very easy thing to say. And secondly, it's really quite insulting. It implies that people who use the MBTI either are stupid, yeah, maybe some, but not this group, or they're deliberately out to con the public. And frankly, if I was someone who wanted to con the public and make lots of money, this would be what I was doing. There are much better ways of making lots of money than using the MBTI. So, I think, as I said, this is a very lazy criticism. Certainly there's much better ways of getting rich quick. If you'd like to share with me later, I'll be really happy to hear them. But there are some more scientific criticisms. There are some, perhaps, criticisms which take a little bit more time and energy to answer, which I think I'm going to tell you over
I'd like to find out. Thank you. So we'll start with the type, not trait, or is it, how is personality actually distributed? So again, I've sort of my go-to, and many of you may have come across this before, we talk about handedness. We talk a lot about handedness and how type is really just talking about whether you have a preference for one or the other, and in the same way that when we were children or when we've had children, we think it's actually quite helpful to work out what your preference is so you can specialise, and that's the way you will learn to write more quickly. Then we think it's useful for you to understand what your preferences are in terms of your personality. But we equally say with handedness that if you want to do some tasks, you're going to need to use the other hand. And hence the picture of a piano player. The other thing I've taken to adding to that is that if I was interested in manual dexterity, and I was wanting to do a scientific study of manual dexterity, I wouldn't only ask somebody, are they a left-hander or a right-hander? I would have them do a whole range of tedious little things that they have to do with their right hand, and they have to do with their left hand, and I would be timing them, and I would be doing speed and accuracy, and I would be getting some kind of detailed metric on that. But for everyday purposes, I don't make people do that. I say, you're a left-hander or a right-hander. And that is a useful thing for us to be able to do. It can inform all kinds of stuff that we might be doing in life. And I kind of think about type theory in some ways when I also think about trait theory. I think about it on similar lines. Because I do use trait-based personality questionnaires. I use them for those things that you need to use them for, like recruitment and selection. I might use them if I'm doing some kind of detailed research where I'm looking at some form of correlation with a particular behaviour. So it's not that I don't believe in trait questionnaires. It's not that I don't believe that those have a useful purpose. I just believe that you have different questionnaires that you might use and different models that you might use depending on what you're trying to do. So if I kind of take that handedness thing, if I'm trying to do manual dexterity, I do all the little scientific things, but for everyday purposes, I say left-hander, right-hander. With personality, for some things, I would have people do a tediously long questionnaire with a very detailed printout on, 32 or 40 or whatever your favourite number is, different traits, all of which are going to be measured on some continuum, and that can be very useful. When I'm working with people, particularly in development, I find their head explodes if they try to remember all of that. And mine doesn't explode anymore, but to get to the point where I could understand all of that, I put in quite a lot of effort. And generally, people who are trying to do some personal development do not want to put in that much effort. That is not the game there, therefore they did not want to become experts in personality, not even their own personality. So going with something that they can remember and use is much more useful than something that is a detailed blueprint of them, but is essentially meaningless to them. So that's sort of one end of that spectrum. You also raised the thing of 4 colours is easier to remember than 16 types. I think that's true, and that's an illustration of actually the simpler you can give people, the more memorable it is for them and the more useful. And I think we could all take our own opinion, and possibly based on who we're working with and why and what for, whether actually just going with the 4-part category is the best place to start for people, or whether 16 is a good place for them, or whether we want to take them to a deeper place. But all these different places can all be useful. And it's like, it's having a toolkit, and we don't all have just one tool. We pull out the right one for the right purpose, or hopefully we pull out the right one for the right purpose. So that's really, for me, the type versus trait. There is various pieces of research that kind of go into the more psychometric bit of it and the bimodal distribution, and is there a dip in the middle? But basically, the questionnaires, the type questionnaires, have been created in order to try and get into these categories. So they do tend to do that. So getting into that is all a bit circular. For me, it's really much more pragmatic, particularly if I'm talking with a would-be client, about what is going to be useful here. Yeah? The other thing I would also add is that if you use MBTI Step 2, you're getting a little bit of both anyway. But for me, it's much more of a pragmatic thing of what's going to be useful to the other person. Not what do I like, what's useful to my client. And I'm sure you're all in development and you would see that too. Internal consistency and reliability, is this still me?
I think I've taken over the next one.
Excellent.
But hey, let's just see how it goes.
Let's see if I remember this stuff. Does everyone remember what internal consistency reliability is about? So that's that bit about, do the different items that all line up in one scale, do they kind of correlate together? Does that sound familiar to people? Do you remember what the rule of thumb for what's good is? 0.7. I hear a little lone voice. You can be loud and confident with 0.7. It's the right answer. But Angelina will now show off for us. She held back. Okay, so 0.7 is the sort of what we're all taught when we do these courses. Some of us retain it, some of us forget it because it's not particularly helpful to us. But 0.7 is the number that academics will bandy around. So when people bandy around, there's no reliability and validity to the Myers-Briggs or whichever questionnaire they're wanting to diss. Say, well, what do you think the standard is that you'd be wanting to achieve? Because here's the data, oops, I've gone to that. Here's the data for the MBTI. So we're looking for 0.7 or above. We get 0.8. It's good. It's really good by the academic standards, which is one of the reasons it's so irritating when people just regurgitate it's got no reliability. Like, there it is. That's your data. Also readily available in the references there. And, we've referred to the stuff that's in the manual because it's easy for you to get hold of, but other people who've done this independently, they find consistently that it is consistent. It does what it says on the tin.
Is the old data worse?
Not much.
Okay.
No, teeny bit, but not much.
Right.
Yeah. Still in the acceptable range.
So each new edition has tried to improve, but it started out pretty good.
Are these figures based on reported type or on best fit type?
Oh, so this is all reported type. Because you can't really do a correlation from best fit because you don't get the variance. I'm getting all technical
That's
now.
a big question.
I think this is...
Yeah.
This
But
is... Go on. This is... If the... There's two arguments. The argument for the academics is that the questionnaire is not reliable. There's another thing to say, well, actually, we should be going by questionnaire, we should be going best fit type. But this is countering the idea that the questionnaire is not reliable. And it is.
And I would say that by and large, most academics don't get the very concept of best fit, which will be a whole other reason to be talking to them about it.
I only ask that because my experience over the last years has been how many people are reporting a work type,
which
is not their best fit type.
Yeah.
And if we're not differentiating those two, the figures we're using to me feel a bit less.
Absolutely. That takes us into the realm of validity. It's a very valid point, not wanting to, no pun intended, and it's really important. And I think that part of it is just distinguishing those things. I'm picking off reliability first, which in some ways is the less exciting bit, but it's easy to answer because it's 0.8. Look at it, read them and weep. But the validity part is absolutely the more important piece. And whether we're talking about best fit or just what the questionnaire says, it's absolutely critical in our type work. And it's also another big differentiator of what we're doing compared with trait-based questionnaires, where what the scores on the doors, what they come out with, that is what it is. Less helpful for development. Yeah.
One of my concerns is that when it comes to a type, it's a holistic thing. It's more than just the sum of its parts. And so yes, we break it down into base dichotomies. If we can prove consistency of dichotomies, that means that each dichotomy on its own can be consistent. And we do the same thing with big five into its traits. But because it's a holistic entity, this type, what the question I would ask is, if you put all these dichotomies together and take them together as an overall type descriptor, does that have the
That's
same level
nearly
of
the next
consistency?
slide.
Oh.
But we're starting with this in part because it's the easy bit, but there are clearly more complicated bits for us to get to. But also because this is the way that all these sort of standard questionnaires get looked at, because the standard questionnaires just look at one dimension at a time. And coming back to John's earlier point, that all of the sort of the academic, this is what a good questionnaire looks like, are all based on those standards. So we're kind of building up to say, we can tick the boxes on those standards. There are some extra and more important to us things that kind of sit on top of that, but that's mostly not where the academics are shooting us down. Is it your turn now?
I think it's me, though.
Oh, good.
Okay. So, we talked about internal consistency reliability. Of course, what people will talk about more is what in the jargon is called test-retest reliability. Is a thing consistent over time? If I take it today, I'll take it tomorrow, will I get the same result? And we're still on the reporting type, we're still on the questionnaire, the what was in the MBTI questionnaire. Yeah. So, here's some data, because, we haven't looked at the numbers yet. Lots of numbers in there. But if we look at this slide, this is the current UK version of the MBTI questionnaire. And you can see that over an interval of time, are those numbers above 0.7?
Yeah.
Yay! Current US form over 4 weeks, are those numbers above 0.7?
Yeah.
Yep. Over the longer time intervals, the numbers drop, but actually if you look at all these numbers and compare them with other questionnaires, those numbers are better than most, I would say. A lot better than some. Including Hogan and including the NeoPi.
Form G is not in use though, is it?
Form G is an old version. We just I put that up there because that was the only study we currently have, which is a really long time interval.
Is that the one that you score with a grid?
You used to, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But the bottom line of that slide is that those numbers are better valid than you would expect. So it is consistent over time. And of course, the criticism you'll typically hear is more along the lines of, well, I took it once, and I took it again, and I got a wholly different result. And you will often hear repeated, when people take the MBTI, and they take it again, half the time they don't get the same result. Shock horror. Let's actually look at that. So this is for the US version of the MBTI, the code US version of the MBTI. And you can see that after a 4-week interval, which is the sort of time scale people normally use for this sort of research, 90% of people agree that they're still EOI, which they started out with, 91% SOM, 85% TOF, 9% JOP. So that looks pretty good. Most people still agree with each dichotomy. But then, as Jack said before, what about whole type? And if we listen to what's said about the MBTI, we'd expect that half the time people get an entirely different type. Actually, 65% of the time they get exactly the same type. So only 35% of the time they get a different type. And if you think about how this works statistically, and I apologise for using that word to some of you, the way that these work, these are probabilities. So in order to work out the probability of getting all 4 letters the same, you multiply that, by that, by that, by that, and the answer, of course, is? 65. Oh, pretty close. 63%. So actually about 65% is bang on where you'd expect in fact cycling. And the other thing I should say is that if you look at people who get exactly the same result, or just one dichotomy difference, that's 93%. So only 7% of people get 2 or more differences in their type. Well, that's pretty good, especially as we're dealing here with, as you said, the instrument, not the wider use of it in terms of it. So, yeah, it ain't perfect, but nothing in this side of the world of ours is, sadly. And it's certainly a lot better than the, half people get a different answer, which you get value of that. Does that make sense to people? So that was a little bit about reliability. Let's talk about validity. People will often say things like, well, the MBTI isn't valid. It doesn't predict job performance at all. We'll get onto that question in a second. Because actually there's lots of evidence for validity of the MBTI. There's lots of evidence that it does the sort of thing it's meant to. It correlates with other personality questionnaires in the way you would expect, given that this is measuring that and this is measuring that. I'm not going to go through this in detail because we're here for hours and hours, and all of this stuff is in the paper.
It's the boring stuff.
It's the exciting stuff. I don't know. There aren't any more numbers that way. There's some behind Penny on the wizard somewhere. It relates to occupational choices and interests in the way we might expect. So Hopkins found that those felt that their job matched their type, people knew their type, high grade job satisfaction. This study by Sitzman is on the basis of, let me just check the numbers, it's a bit of a small study, 178,087 people found that people in jobs which have what they call high task significance, which means that what they did in their jobs really had an impact on people, they tend to have more homogeneous personalities, and personalities group together more, in a way you might expect from the MBTI. And other researchers into the same sort of thing. There is a lot of research done, some by us, at what was then OPP, it's now a Myers-Briggs company, into workplace behaviours, things like working with teams, things like how people use technology. And you can download lots of those things from our website, and again, they're mentioned in the paper. People will say, well, the MBTI is all very well, I suppose, but actually you could get all of that stuff and more out of the Big Five consequential system. But again, as Penny said, it's horses for courses. It's a tool that works best in any given situation. And there are a few studies, including this one, which say that for some applications, actually the MBTI has what we call incremental validity over the Big Five. It does more with the Big Five. That was a study back in 2014. But for any tool used in development, perhaps the biggest and most important thing is, does it have the effect we want it to? Do interventions using that tool have positive effects on people, on teams, on organisations? And again, we mentioned a lot of those in from the paper, but here's a few examples. So, for example, after teachers have been trained using the MBTI, their students' grades improved. Medical students following MBTI feedback reported more certainty, or certainly, I beg your pardon, this bit there, in career choice. In one study that we did, ratings of teamwork improved. People reported improved communications. Teams solve problems more efficiently. And this is an interesting one. There's a study that looked at design of residential environments, and what they found was that when the architect, or the designer actually, not the architect, went through MBTI training, they designed environments the way that appealed to more people. So there's lots of evidence out there. There's lots of evidence out there. But of course, we'll still hear comments like this. A review by Druckmann and Bjork, not Singer, I don't think, concluded that the MBTI lacked any validity in terms of predicting job performance. To which I say, that's not what it was bloody well meant to do. It's not about predicting job performance. It's, as it says there, using the MBTI for selection is like using a screwdriver to bang in a nail. Naming the MBTI for not being particularly useful in job performance is like me picking up a screwdriver and a nail, walking over to this wall, oh, I still haven't shot, aren't you? And banging out the nail of the screwdriver, and then chucking the screwdriver away and saying, what a useless screwdriver. I can't bang any nails of that whatsoever. And saying the MBTI isn't useful for selection is really about doing that very thing. So perhaps when we're looking for the evidence for the validity and utility of personality assessments in development, whereas the MBTI are early in the tool, we need to go beyond the selection piece and look at some other things that are important, which I think is over to you.
Great, so before I go on to the next section, I just want to do a little bit of a recap of John's, just to make sure we've kind of got those fundamental messages. So when we hear people say, there's no reliability and validity, I take it for granted that there's no reliability and validity. They are just plain wrong. We have the evidence, it's published, we cite it, it's freely available for anyone who's not too lazy to go looking for it. What do we mean by that? So we'll go back to reliability. So reliability are those two different things, that 0.7 is the magic number. So there's the internal consistency reliability, and then there's the retest over time. So John showed you the data for the second of those, I showed you the data for the first, both of them clearly bigger than 0.7. So just by everyone's standards, we're doing what everyone else says we should do. Then there's validity, which is a slightly separate thing from reliability, but for lay people it's very common to sort of bump them all in together. Validity is, does it do what it's supposed to do? Does it do what we're saying it is supposed to do? And the problem we get into with validity is there is a ton of validity data and research involving MBTI and indeed other type instruments. There's tons of it out there. What there isn't is validity data showing that your type will predict your performance in a job. There isn't that, because that's not what it does. That would be like John's trying to bang in his nail with a screwdriver. But there is tons of validity evidence for doing the kinds of things we think it is supposed to do. So all that stuff that John was citing earlier about improving teamwork and improving communication and doing better problem solving as a result of doing some MBTI intervention. Not oh, we know that, one type is better at this than another type. But as a result of knowing about type, you can improve various things in your life. It's that kind of validity that's relevant, but it's not that kind of validity that our friends like Carter like to cite. And sometimes this gets beautifully corrupted by just being cut off at that point. So it just says lacks any validity. The rest of the sentence says in terms of predicting job performance, at which point you can say, well, that's clearly not relevant. But most people, well, not most people, many of the critics just stop it after the word validity. So that's the kind of critical thing around that part. So having kind of laid out our stall of these criticisms are wrong and often lazy, John and I wanted to look into, well, how can we be more constructive about this? Because we really think the heart of it is about, are you using a tool for selection or are you using it for development? There are different criteria for each. The practitioners know this already, you know this already. Somehow our academic colleagues haven't quite cottoned on to it. And they keep doing research and evaluating personality questionnaires as if they were all intended for the same thing. And that same thing is largely intended for selection. Now they might say, well, if it's good for selection, it'll be good for other things as well. But we just know that not to be true from our experience. I haven't.
You could use it for selection. The problem is no one will do the study because you have to hire everyone and then look at what job it did. If you are willing to do that and you had a large enough sample, great, go ahead and use it that way. But who is willing to do that study to get the criterion validity for using it in
well,
selection?
what would be
no
the
one, it's
point?
way too expensive. And there's instruments out there like, say, IQ tests that already do that job well.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So what would be the point?
Yeah.
And for me, if I'm advising somebody on what should I use as a personality assessment, it very much depends on what you're using it for. The difficulty is that there's a ton of data about what you should use for selection, and there really isn't much data about what you use for development. So people go, well, here's where the data is, so that must be the stuff we should use. And I think that's where it all gets very confused. So I guess that's where the sort of start of the campaign to say, you need to have some different kinds of research, and even validity research, that looks at the stuff that's important to us in development. I've got that with smiley faces. And we just haven't had that. What we have for far too long is we've had practitioners and scientists sitting on opposite sides of the divide. When I go to conferences, for example, the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychologists in the US, which is the biggest gathering of occupational psychologists in the world, they often talk about this scientist-practitioner divide. And a lot of it is all about, well, if only that lot understood better. And I have to say that happens on both sides of the divide. And I kind of realised I've fallen into some of that. And what I'd really like to do is to create something that says, well, instead of us just kind of picking our side and yelling at each other, let's do something that actually helps to build a bridge. Let's do something that helps the scientists do some science that would be helpful to practitioners in this particular area. They're great at doing science that is helpful to practitioners in another area, so why not get them to engage in what we're doing? But to do that, we need to start speaking in their terminology as well. So I haven't probably given you time to read that. It's very much about us just yelling at each other. And there are some other people trying to sort of do this same thing. So there's a sort of field of study now called evidence-based practice, and a particularly useful article by Barins et al. One of the et al. Is a guy called Rob Reiner, who may be known to some of you. I've known Rob for a long time. And they're really trying to get their heads around and to be helpful to practitioners to say, well, what is the evidence you need? And then let's work out how we can give it to you, and let's recognise the different kinds of evidence you need so that you can be making good and informed decisions. And what they've been very good at saying, getting a message out there, is this scientific evidence, the stuff that you see published in most journals, is only one of the kinds of evidence that you should be looking at. So they're not saying it's not important, they're not saying it's bad, and just saying it's just one of the kinds of evidence that you should be looking at. And sometimes, depending on your context, there might not be very much in there. And I think we're in one of those contexts. Then there's organisational evidence. So when you're going to work in a particular organisation, there will be stuff within that organisation that you should be paying attention to, quite aside from the scientific literature, for you to know whether what you're recommending is going to land well there, it's going to suit their purpose, it's going to suit their needs and goals. Where I like the cartoon. I've since heard that Einstein might not have actually said this, somebody else might have said it. But so not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And I think for me, that speaks to the scientific evidence thing. That's the stuff that can be counted. But sometimes it's really important. But just because that's the only stuff that's out there doesn't mean it covers all eventualities. They also talk about practitioner evidence. And they actually accept that, professional judgment, that stuff we use every day, but that's a valid and useful and part of the picture, and we should be doing that. And they recognise that that kind of tacit knowledge is an important part of the process. They also talk about stakeholder evidence. So, these people we're going to do stuff with, hopefully, not to, these people we're going to be working with, they have evidence. They're going to be affected about how the reaction is used. So what they think of the process, what they find useful, needs to be part of that pattern. So someone earlier on said, people don't like doing these forced choice questionnaires. That is a consideration when you're getting people to fill out a questionnaire. Is it going to be something that they're going to find painful and annoying to do, and is that going to be helpful to you? And that might mean choosing a different questionnaire, or it might mean framing it for them to say, I know you're going to find this a bit annoying. I sympathise. It can be a bit annoying, but trust me, we'll talk about it afterwards and see where we get to. That can often break a lot down, a lot of that kind of stuff. But being sensitive to all of these different kinds of evidence in making our choice is really important. And I think they've done us a great favour in saying that scientific evidence is only one out of the four things. So I think that implicitly we do all pay attention to these things. But very little of this stuff is in that literature. And so we end up weighting our stuff much further down this hierarchy, further down this list. Whereas our friends in academia quite often are just very steeped in this, aren't really aware of this stuff, because they're not doing that stuff. They're not out there with the stakeholders and the end users. Is it still me or is it you now?
So what's the next slide?
Oh, it's us, the audience.
Yeah, it's the audience.
So it's none of us, it's all you. So what kind of evidence do you use when you're choosing an assessment? We've sort of covered some of this already, so we might do it quite briefly. Angelina.
So I do look at the reliability and validity evidence.
Hurrah!
But I have used some assessments that came up as reliable and valid, and then I'm talking to the person just thinking, this is just not them.
Yeah.
There's contradictions within itself, and then I stop using it.
Yeah, so you're getting some validity impression, I guess, in a way.
Yeah,
But
so
what they've
it's
published
a
looks
mixture of-
okay.
Yeah,
I've had that
it's a mixture of
experience too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is something about that stakeholder experience, there's something about your professional judgment. If it doesn't land, it's not helpful.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel right, or what it's measuring isn't useful.
Yeah.
Like popular trait talks about what you're interested in school for 2 pages at the back, and I'm like, why?
Yeah. So you completely lose your audience sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think time is so huge. Is this a 6 month coaching engagement? Is it a 2-hour workshop? Is it a...
Yeah.
I mean, what I use depends on how far are we going.
Yeah.
And yet, making sure that whatever I choose, you can go deeper, like interaction styles versus DISC, for example.
Yeah,
where I can
absolutely.
continue it.
Yeah. And you have that lens. Not everyone does. Sometimes people go, it's just a half-day work.